well, good evening, everybody, and sorry for to be a little bit late this evening. We've had some technical glitches, but that's just part of the new era that we're in, isn't it? My name is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we are here with our very good friend Ann Perry for another virtual event. And tonight she's going to be discussing the brand new book, A Darker Reality, that Barbara's holding up a copy of. And Ann has very kindly signed a batch for us, and they should be arriving back here soon. So I'll put a link in the comments field if you'd like to order a copy.
Actually, I just finished signing them this afternoon. They're already waiting for somebody to come and pick them up.
Fantastic. Excellent. So we should have them very shortly. And if you have any questions for Ann, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and Barbara will summon me back up towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So the light, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to see because it's glaring, but you will notice there's a young woman with hair like Elena, long and blonde, and wearing a glamorous black dress, which she wears at the outset of this book, and holding a box camera, which I'm assuming is the latest cutting edge photography technology of the 1930s. Is that right?
Yes, I hope so. I don't have anything to do with the covers, but I do like that one because I think the color's good. It's arresting. It
is very nice. So Ann, for those of you who do not know her, is the author of so many books I can't count them. One is the William Monk series set in the kind of mid to late Victorian era. Then umpteen novels about Thomas and Charlotte Pitt, which come up to the turn of the 20th century. 3 or is it 4 now? 4 novels with their son Daniel Pitt, who carries us into the 20th century. Numerous other things, and this is the third, Elena Standish. But I remember that Ann won an Edgar for a short story. And the reason I remember so clearly that she won the Edgar Award is that she was at the Poison Pen, which is relatively near shopping mecca called Fashion Square and so forth. And Ann said to me that she needed to go shopping for a dress. And I, not being stupid, thought, aha, she's getting a dress for the Edgar banquet because she's won the award and she wants to look great. And in fact, Ann, it was a gorgeous dress.
Yes, it was the short story, Heroes, that got me the invitation to that. And I've never worn the dress again, but I did have fun that night.
Of course you did. It's a wonderful dress.
One occasion when they sweep in with a great big skirt and all the rest of it, pale green.
And I mention this because dresses are a major player in this book. Anne goes to enormous lengths. You'd almost think she was writing a fashion magazine here in some part, because, you know, we've forgotten now, because people are so casual, just how formal entertaining was back in the 1930s. And this book opens with a gorgeous party in upper social and political circles in Washington, D.C. And the women have these incredible gowns. Did you, I mean, you described them so well in this book, Anne. Did you do some fashion research or did you just make it up?
But no, I did some fashion research, which was very, very easy for me because a charming friend of a friend gave me a gift of a great big book of fashion in the 30s. It's a wonderful book. And it's got lots of photographs of well-known people, but particularly film stars of that time. Although they did look so gorgeous. There seems to be a lot of lovely silks and stuff cut on the bias. So it was unforgiving if you had rolls of fat where you shouldn't. But if you were slim and could walk gracefully, they just looked gorgeous. Think of an old Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers film.
Well, our photographs of Jean Harlow or whatever, you know, you did have to be impossibly slim with no telltale bulges in order to wear, because a lot of that, I mean, it was like, you know, it clung to you, would be a way of saying it. But one of the things that I did admire about, because Elena, being a photographer, has her camera and she comes to this party, which is being hosted by her grandparents for their 60th wedding anniversary in Washington. And she wants to take photos of the party guests. And because the women are dressed to kill, then it's a particularly fertile time for Elena to be taking photos. But I love the way you walk us through the party. I'm so sorry we can't see Elena in her remarkable black dress that you described.
Yes, I'm afraid they put a fur coat on top of it, didn't they?
Well, I mean, unless you had illustration. And I also thought it was interesting that there's one woman that we don't much care for, and you have her dressed in green, which is a really trying color for most people to wear. Now, you did that on purpose, didn't you?
So subconsciously, yes, because I think green can be very flattering, especially to blondes. You remember Emily frequently wore pale green.
Well, this is not pale green. This is a much more.
Yes, yes, it was not a fortunate choice, but she's not a fortunate woman.
Very true. Anyway, it's fun, you know, to look back and think about how people thought about, you know, making an appearance at, even if it's a private affair, it's not a public party. It's an affair that where the friends of the long married couple are invited, but still people really took care. The men were all in evening suits. The caterers, you point out, were wearing jackets that were shorter cut as compared to the men with their more lengthier coats.
We call them bum starvers.
They're what?
We call them bum starvers, the shorter jackets.
Bum starvers?
Yes.
Why?
Because they stop at the waist, more or less.
Oh, bum stoppers. Oh, sorry, I thought you said starvers.
Starvers. Yes. I didn't make a name up, and I don't think I used it in that because I think it's strictly British.
No, you didn't use it in this, but you could have, because after all, some of the people here in America are British. So you set your stage with a lot of the great and the good in Washington, D.C., among whom is President Franklin Roosevelt and his wife.
Yes.
And they're there for cachet, but they're also there as useful to the plot, right?
Yes, yes. These are very important people with a great deal of power. Grandfather is rich, and he's also very powerful and influential.
Right, but I mean, one of the reasons that you've got Roosevelt at the party where a murder occurs is that he is surrounded by security, by the Secret Service.
Yes.
So by using him, what you did was you created that kind of classic English country house murder where only the people inside the country house one of them has to be the suspect, you know, the guilty
so
person.
Carefully because of Roosevelt's being there. The perimeters of the estate were guarded so carefully, nobody could have snuck in or out.
Right. So he turns out to be a useful device. Now, I thought it was interesting that when the murder is announced, to quote Agatha Christie, that one of the first jobs of Elena Standish, our heroine, and her family is to usher the Roosevelts out the back of the house before the police arrive. Is that something that you know would be true, or are you imagining that would be true?
I just imagined that they would be got off the scene immediately. And,
well, I mean, because it would turn it into a political circus if it turned out the president and his wife were present at a murder scene. So they provide the security, they seal off the house so that all of the suspects have to be inside the house, and then they disappear and you get them off stage.
Yes.
I think even you probably didn't want to make Franklin Roosevelt one of the suspects.
I know, I didn't want to. Maybe some people have done that one, but I didn't want to. I wanted to concentrate very much on grandfather and his social set of very powerful people, very influential, and not the ones you want to be questioning.
So these are Elena's maternal grandparents.
Yes.
And their name is, his first name is Wyatt. I'm drawing a blank. What are their last names? You probably aren't going to remember either. Hold on, I'll look in the book. Because I called him Wyatt all the way through. It actually doesn't even say in the blurb. Well, anyway, grandfather Wyatt and his wife Dorothy, if I recall correctly. No, Dorothy. Yeah, is it Dorothy or is she the other set of grandparents? Can we either one of us remember?
Yes, Catherine is the mother. Dorothy is the
Okay, so Elena has not seen her maternal grandparents, in whose home she currently is, but once, according to you, when she was quite small.
Yes, because of course the war intervened and transatlantic travel was not taken as lightly as we do today.
So,
It'd go by sea.
right. So Elena's mother, Catherine, has married a British gentleman
Yes.
who he's in the Foreign Office, and he does really well, and he becomes a prominent ambassador in cool places like Paris, for example. And
Elena an opportunity to speak these other languages, to
which
speak
is very
Italian,
helpful.
French, and German very well.
Right. In fact, you say at one point in the book she speaks flawless German, which I think is probably helpful. Anyway, they're basically strangers to Elena, and she's interested in her mother, who obviously hasn't been back either. She wants her mother to really have a wonderful and warm reunion with her parents in the home that she grew up in and where, was all happy. And so it's hard when a murder is introduced.
It's very hard indeed, and it gets harder.
Yes.
It gets worse. We go through the story. There are some decisions that many people have had to make a variation of that decision as to what you will do and where your loyalties lie.
So part of the plot has to do with, naturally, since Elena, we already know from the earlier books, works for MI6, even though she is not able to talk about it. And her paternal grandfather was, in fact, the head of MI6 during the First World War. And he's kind of a consultant to the current head of MI6. So Elena can't really talk about what she's doing to her parents. And remind us, Anne, what happened to Elena when you introduced her? Because she's had some really bad luck and also bad judgment.
Well, she fell in love with a man who was also working in MI6. She wasn't at that time. And she defended him and lied for him. It had an affair, which was not very clever in those days, but he turned out to be a traitor. And of course, she lost her job because she'd helped him.
Well, she was in the Foreign Office then, right?
Yes.
She wasn't in MI6.
No, she was in the Foreign Office. And, she screwed up her career, I'm afraid. They couldn't forgive her because she'd been very unwise. Girls didn't have affairs in those days. We had to be very much more discreet. And she helped him. She thought he was the real thing. And of course, in the next story, she gets sent to Italy to rescue him.
Yes, which is a very tense tale. But anyway, so now she's in MI6 rather than in the Foreign Office. But what she really is, for all purposes to people who meet her, is a woman trying to establish a career as a professional photographer, right?
Yes. It manages to be a passport to get her to many places and explain why she looks at things closely and stands in one spot with a camera in her hand. And she gets to meet some interesting people.
She does. And in fact, the discerning reader will work out as Anne pilots Elena around this party before the murder occurs and takes like a zillion photos, that the photos are probably going to figure into the investigation. I mean, wouldn't they?
Yes, a sharp person will work that out.
A sharp person would figure it out, right?
Yes.
But I really enjoyed, this book unfolds at a relatively leisurely pace as compared to some. And it's really, I really enjoyed touring around this beautiful house with all these beautiful people and all their beautiful clothes, and Elena setting up shots and, doing all of this. I mean, it was sort of like having Richard Avedon or Cecil Beaton, at a party. So did you sort of choreograph all that? You must have, in order to make it work.
To an extent, yes. I had to get the right people in the right places at the right times, and finding it quite natural to photograph them because they all want to appear and be seen in the magazines as having been at that party.
So
Because it
in
was
addition, yeah, in addition to taking photographs, because this is way before a digital age when your camera did all the work for you, she has a notebook and she makes a note of where the photograph was taken, who the people are, and the time. And that's partly because she's getting away with photographing these people at this party by promising to give them a copy of the photo. So she sometimes takes like multiple shots to make sure that
get the most flattering one possible. And it's not always the one that they think it will be. She understands lighting and so forth better than they do. And she promises them if they're featured in the Tatler, Mrs. So-and-so with, dressed in so-and-so with at this party, they're there to be noticed as well as to enjoy themselves.
well, it's Washington, D.C. I mean, what a surprise. It could also be like Hollywood, for example, where the same dynamic would occur. I like the fact, Anne, that she is so honest about her skill, because at some point somebody asked her if she's any good or if her photographs are any good, and she can't bring herself to lie. So she said, well, some of them are, but some of them are not. And
That's what it takes so many. You can't always tell which one will be exactly right and which one won't.
And she's also looking for a deeper truth in the subjects, not just, that they're pretty or well-dressed, but hoping that there will be some moment, twist, whatever it is, that will reveal something about
Well, there are certain photographs of famous people that are very much more revealing than others.
There are. And you also make a note that oftentimes people don't see themselves as they really are. And so photographs can be, it reminded me a bit, who was the painter? Was it Lucian Freud that painted a portrait of Queen Elizabeth that was just absolutely a shocker?
I think it was, but I wouldn't put money on it. Yes. It must be very difficult indeed if you really are a portrait painter, as opposed to a painter of nice pictures, not to emphasize something that is very revealing of character. Because if you take a lot, the subject is going to lose their concentration on looking like so-and-so now and again, and you're going to see the real person through. I must use that in a future story.
Well,
it's very good. Thank you.
Well, you're entirely welcome. It also reminds me, and years ago when I was in London, I always liked the National Portrait Gallery. It's one of my favorite museums in London. So I've been there many times, and most of it is always the same. I mean, if you're up on the top floor, you're in there with the Tudors and Hans Holbein and painting the Tudors and all that good stuff. But they always have an exhibition hall, and they had one of black and white photographs, and I think they were all crime writers, and none of them was flattering, none of them was well lit or a portrait as you might think of it. I've never forgotten the portrait of Petey James. I mean, she was probably in her 80s when it was taken, but I mean, it is so stark and so unflattering, and yet she was a woman of she had a real hard edge, I mean, she was a terrific writer and a survivor. I mean, I've always admired the fact that she made a life for herself despite all the bad things that had happened to her, raised her children, became a novelist, the whole bit. But when you looked at that photograph, you could see there was just like granite, underneath her face. And I thought, how brave of her to have agreed to have that photograph shown in public.
Well, maybe she agreed before the photographer took the pictures that he or she would have the right to use the best ones. But
I doubt it. She was pretty smart. I don't think she would have been. I think she was a really honest woman, and I've always thought that she was willing to show that face to the world.
Yes, I've seen a fair few pictures of writers that I wouldn't have recognized them when I met them, shall we say.
Well, the pictures of writers that appear on book jackets are often quite flattering, airbrushed, well lit. We remember to put makeup on, all that good stuff.
Oh, yes, well, I remember to put makeup on, but the last picture I had taken which I think the one on that is one of them. It was actually taken in natural light, and I did my own makeup, which is just street makeup that I ordinarily wear. And the photographer just moved around. There was no artifice to help me at all. Just a darn good photographer. And the natural light is often kinder than the artificial light.
You know, I miss candlelight. I mean, if you really think about it, candlelight is far more flattering than electric light.
Yes, yes, it is.
It was a problem, I mean, in the Victorian age when we were moving, you know, from candlelight to gaslight, in various books I have read, you know, the women would have preferred their parlor and their dining room and so forth to stay with the gas, with the candles, because the gaslight was so much less flattering.
And it's amazing what shadows can do, especially if you get the light below you. It can be terrifying. If the light is under your chin and the shadows sort of go upwards, it can be very, very sinister.
Oh, look how brave you and I are. Here we both have our face on a screen with light, and you know, neither one of us is young. And I think, you know, but what I maybe didn't really emphasize about the portrait of Petey James and the other authors in that exhibition, they were black and white. They were not in color, and black and white is far starker, is far harsher than you know, any wash of color that can soften.
But in many ways, it's cleverer, isn't it?
It's interesting to watch movies, you know, that are shot in black and white as compared to all the color movies of today.
You know, I've seen several old movies lately because there's not much on the current that I'd like. And it's amazing how sometimes I'll be halfway through the movie before I realize it's in black and white. Because your mind gets so accustomed to it. And I don't know whether you're actually seeing it in your mind in color. But sometimes I've gone a long way through something and suddenly thought, oh, it's black and white. Or somebody's asked me, was it black and white? And I said, I don't remember, because I was so drawn into it.
Well, you know, some of the 1930s figures we were touching on earlier, like Jean Harlow or Fred and Ginger and so forth, the really iconic photographs of them are in black and white. And most of the time, the women were wearing stuff that reflected light, like satin, you know, so that there was a luminous quality. I've got a picture of Jean Harlow in my mind in one of those satin slip dresses, and you know, the light of the reflecting off that white dress is just remarkable. It's almost like moonlight or something.
Yes, she was quite a big girl, wasn't she?
And brave, because she let herself be photographed from the back in a dress like that. I always thought, oh my Lord, you know, where we are. Well, anyway, back to Elena. So at the party, when a woman is indeed found dead outside, a woman that Elena had just met, and a woman who was wearing, speaking of white dresses, just a fabulous white beaded dress.
Yes.
And she's Austrian, as it turns out. Anyway.
And I had Hedy Lamarr in mind.
You what?
I had Hedy Lamarr.
I knew you did. And, you know, do we want to talk about why? Not only for her looks, but why would you have had, I knew it was Hedy Lamarr when I was reading it. Of course I did.
Well, you know me, and you know the way my mind works.
No, it's actually Hedy Lamarr. It's not just the fact that she was beautiful or Austrian or whatever, but Hedy Lamarr helped develop radar. I mean, she had this incredible mind, and during World War II,
telephones and things. Yes, she was brilliant.
And that's why I thought of her. It wasn't just her looks, but it was the fact that here, this gorgeous, glamorous woman turned out to have a remarkable mind for science, mathematics, and all, and actually helped win the war with the work.
Absolutely.
So anyway, here's this woman named Lila, and she is found dead in the parking in the the courtyard to this very large home in Washington, and it looks as though she's just been run over. But then further investigation reveals that somebody hit her over the head and then ran her over. So it turns into a murder case.
Yeah. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been. It has to have been somebody within the guest list or the host.
Or somebody within the house, because you've already established the fact that the perimeter.
Because of the security. There was no possibility of an outsider. So the pressure is on. It's a claustrophobic sort of story in many ways.
Well, but aren't all country house murders claustrophobic?
I think so. That's part of the pleasure.
Yeah.
When
And
you
it
turn up
doesn't,
and you know it has to be somebody here. You can't
well,
blame them.
yeah, it doesn't even have to be a country house. It can be, it could be a small ship. It could be a railroad car, Murder on the Orient Express. It could be a small island. It could be, all it really needs to be is a relatively small space with a secure perimeter so that
Yes.
only the people inside it can be actors in the story.
Well, I haven't got a very clever, particularly clever murder, but I've got, I hope, a devastating solution.
Yes, well, we can't talk about the end. Let's just say that I was rooting all the way through for it to be a different solution, but it turned out not to be.
Well, it's a situation that many people must have faced.
Yeah. The 30s were just like right now. I mean, there were divided loyalties were just so common, and people had all kinds of, we just rewatched Foyle's War, Anne, which I think is really just absolutely brilliant television. And one of the things that Foyle's War illustrates is how many of the British were actually not in favor of the war, that had some sort of, one either thought that peace should be negotiated or that Hitler had better answers, to how the world should run, and or they were profiteering, or various things.
And lots of them, of course, had lost most of their family in the First World War. So they said, we've been there, done that. We can't go through that again. Never again. But unfortunately, fate has decided that that's not how it works, I'm afraid. And it's amazing how, even though it was such a short time after, people forget.
Yes, that's true. It's only 20, really basically 20 years, 21 formally, between the end of the First World War and the beginning in 1939 of the
Yes.
Second. But I think that what I'm driving at is that there's a tendency now so far away, and possibly here in America, we tend to think of a united Britain, all of them standing up against, the bombing of London, and, Churchill rallying everybody and bringing people back from Dunkirk.
Finally, but there were amazing gaps and surprising loyalties. But when you read what the casualties were in the First World War, you realize that there are some people who lost just about everybody.
Yeah.
I was reading about the protesters earlier on during that gap, and Anthony Eden lost a father, an uncle, a cousin, brothers, all sorts of things. And of course, he was an officer badly wounded himself.
And there were families that lost, because they didn't have, they hadn't enacted the idea that all members of a family couldn't enlist or couldn't enlist in the same regiment or whatever it is. And I'm sure I remember there was one family with 5 sons, and they all enlisted, and I don't remember, like the Sussex Regiment or whatever it was, and they all were killed.
Well, if you look at any country remembrance list in any smaller villages, you see the same names over and over again, and you realize that there were some women who probably lost their fathers, their uncles, their brothers, their cousins, and their sons. There's nobody left. Or who was left was so badly injured, was, debatable as to whether it was a mercy they were left or not.
Well, yeah, there were some, if you think about the men that were gassed, or the men that were, seriously wounded, or the men who suffered from what was then called shell shock and never could recover.
Yeah.
I think that Charles Todd does a really wonderful job depicting that in the,
Absolutely.
And, I'm still in shock that we lost Carolyn Todd just bang in July.
Delightful woman, absolutely delightful person.
She was, and a brilliant novelist. And I thought that, the ability that she and her son, Charles, because they wrote together as Charles Todd, David actually is his real name, but we'll call him Charles, that the empathy that they were able to achieve for Rutledge, who is suffering from long-term shell shock. Although the clever way that they wrote that long-term series is that basically there's no time that elapses book to book. So even though, you know, the series is multiple volumes, in point of fact, they've only moved maybe 2 years. I'm trying to remember. I'd have to go back and count.
I lost my sense of time. I was so involved with the character.
Well, right, but I mean, at some point, you know, if they move Rutledge too far away from the war, then what is going on with him would become less and less believable. So, you know, he basically puts down one case and picks up another, and no time at all goes by.
My critical faculties just go to sleep on that one. He catches England so well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely true. And the other problem, of course, for so many people, not only did they have terrible losses, but for many people, the opportunity to have a family was taken away from them. There weren't enough men to go around. Lots of women never had a chance to marry.
1 million surplus to requirement women.
Yeah. Right. So, but you're not dealing with that. You've moved on to the late 1930s, and you know. So why did you decide to bring Elena to, where has Elena been? Because when we've met her, she has been in
Berlin,
Europe.
and then Trieste and Washington, and the next one, which is written, is back in Berlin again, and Munich.
So,
and the historical, this is the next one, the historical event affecting it is the Night of the Long Knives. You remember when Hitler lost his marbles altogether, and hundreds of men were killed, particularly Ernst Röhm and his SS or AS. Yes.
well,
I forgot the German word for it's that long, and I can't remember what it is. But it was
for whatever it is. But you know, I mean, it was a time of collective madness. I mean, our own Capitol riot should show us how easy it is for that kind of group madness, you know, to overcome people and lead to, I mean, and ours was pales in comparison to what happened with Hitler. I was interested to see today, because I had missed it, but there was a long piece in the Washington Post that somebody hacked successfully into a platform for all of these far-right conspiracy theorists and other people, and retrieved all the data of the members and the people who are sponsoring all these. And, you know, I'm sure it's going to be revealed. I mean, some of these people will be genuine fanatics, you know, really crazy.
But some are fellow travelers in a way.
But some of them are going to be revealed as simply there to profiteer, because there's a lot of money to be made from those kinds of conspiracy addicts, because they sucker people into, you know, donating money. I read a line in something not long ago that said basically Donald Trump's only income right now comes from people making donations in support of his, you know, Stop the Steal and all the rest of it.
Well, he doesn't actually have a marketable skill, does he?
No, and with his corporation being investigated in New York and all, but I mean, I wonder, you know, why these people can't see that they're being exploited financially as well as emotionally. And I think that this hack will reveal a great deal of that, whether anybody will then acknowledge, because nobody wants to believe that they have been suckered.
But
I mean,
people
nobody
have
wants to do that.
Marvelous, inventive way of not believing what they don't want to believe. And it doesn't matter if their belief is absolute nonsense, two things that are mutually exclusive. We can believe in whatever if it matters to us enough. And you can show us that we're wrong and we still won't believe, oh, you're a, you know, believer in such and such, and you're a conspirator. And
well, it's not a modern phenomenon. Patrick and I had a wonderful conversation on Monday with Janice Mina, the Scottish author that lives in Glasgow and has written a short novel about the murder of David Riccio in front of Mary, Queen of Scots.
Mary, Queen of Scots' husband.
No, he wasn't the husband. He was her Italian secretary. She was married to Lord Darnley.
Once? Well, he was her lover then. I thought
No, I
he
think he was just
married
her
several
secretary.
times.
But anyway, the
mean-
point that Denise and I and Patrick talked about was the fanaticism of John Knox and the Calvinists, who were so terrified that Mary represented a return to Catholicism, and that would, this awful fear that they would lose power, that they would lose a lot of things. And I think it's the same dynamic, and we're talking now the 17th century, well, actually 16th century. It's the same
Well,
dynamic.
a lot of people plotted against Elizabeth for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But my point was that, that people adhere to some fear mongering and so forth like that for many reasons. And one of them is that they want to cling to power and they want to cling to financial support.
Yes.
And, Hitler and his gang turned out to be, they were just rapacious, they stole art, they stole money, they were in it for what they could get for it. And as much as they were to try to, achieve world domination, they were basically just a giant gang of crooks.
But have you come across any like example when they were not? Because I don't think I can bring one to mind. There always seemed to be down to the level of what can I get out of this eventually. And we will not know millions of marks, dollars, pounds, whatever you like. It's
the motto is pillage, then plunder. So, right. Or maybe it's plunder, then pillage. I can't remember which. But anyway, the point is get the money first and then, wreak destruction. So it must be plunder, then pillage. Yeah. Right. So there's not a lot more we can say about your story without giving anything away. But there's a phrase, Anne, that's popular at the moment called slow burn. And it applies to psychological thrillers and all, where the whole thing unfolds relatively slowly. And, I like the fact that this book is, I would describe it as a slow burn plot.
That's a very nice way of putting it. And that's what I'll tell people next time. But it's very hot. By the time we get to the end, there's some desperate decisions to be made.
There are, absolutely.
Many people have to make those sorts of decisions in the end.
But you warmed up for that in your other series, because you've written some pretty devastating resolutions for both the Pitt novels and the Monk novels. I mean, it's not as though, and actually in one of the Daniel Pitts, sometimes it's too close to the bone. Sometimes they're all strangers, but sometimes in your stories, they're deeply, deeply connected and very personal. And so the resolution is extremely painful.
Well, I think you're less than honest, and you're losing drama, genuine drama that you could have if you don't make it painful sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And this is, I haven't got in mind a resolution that will be as painful for Elena. The next one, which is finished and handed in, that won't be the resolution you expect, I hope.
I will look forward to it. So on a more cheerful note, Anne has written this year's Christmas novella, and it involves Gracie, does it not?
Yes.
The former maid.
Gracie married now with 3 little children. The little girl, who's really quite a character. I'd like to catch her up in a few years when she's old enough to get involved in the war. She's quite a character. And 2 younger sons. And the little girl is very upset about Christmas. What are we celebrating for? A baby boy's born. We're not going to have another baby boy, are we? We don't need any more. She's got 2 younger brothers. Don't need any more baby boys. But she runs the house. Of course, Telman thinks he's running it, but the little one's running it, really.
Well, I can sympathize with that, since I've coped all day with a sick puppy. Let me tell you, the whole house revolves around, she's fine now. It turned out we took her to the vet.
Thank you. Don't leave me hanging on a thread.
No. She was really miserable, but it turns out she's taking, or I say we are giving her, but that's a joke. Rob, my husband, is giving her antibiotics, which she takes as a little squirt, and she's already
Yes.
picked up, but it just broke my heart to see her whimpering this morning. It's
Oh.
so miserable.
Can't bear it.
I know. And anyway, off she went to the vet, and now she's better, but everything does revolve around, if you have babies, you and
I have
these are-
just finished, I think it'll go off tomorrow, the Christmas novella for next year. And I've got a kitten in that, but nothing happens to it. Golden
Excellent.
rule for mystery writers: never kill the cat.
no, or the dog, as the case.
No,
may be.
or the dog either. But
Right.
if the cat's a little one, a baby, still with blue eyes, you've got to look after it. It's got to come right in the end.
So this year's book, not moving ahead to next year, this book's book, I think it's called A Christmas Journey. Do I have that title right?
I don't know.
Well,
I don't.
I think
Because
that's
that-
it. In any case, Anne has agreed to sign it for us. And so we'll be offering signed copies of it in November, and it makes a lovely Christmas gift or a stocking stuffer. And how many of these have you written now?
19 or 20, something like that.
It's such a lovely gift to your fans, to give them.
I enjoy it so much, and you can have it all work out right in the end if it's a Christmas novella.
Well, that's right. You can't have unhappy endings if you
No,
want.
no, you're allowed to, everybody, all the right people winning, and get rid of all the bad people, and Christmas bells ring out. You can do that on Christmas Eve. It's all right.
Well, the other part that's really nice is it gives you a chance to develop characters, some of the minor characters and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not room enough in the regular novels for them to have these stories play out.
No, but it's such fun. This one is caught up with quite a little bit later, when Scuff is studying medicine and Crow is already qualified as a doctor, and they're running a clinic on the dockside.
Patrick informs me, as he so helpfully does, that it's actually called A Christmas Legacy. And Patrick will put a buy link in the comments field, or you can just go to our web store and type in A Christmas Legacy. But I always love reading them, and it's just a gift. And what inspired you to do those? Because it's a lot of extra work for you.
Well, the first one was an experiment. The story was so intriguing to me about how medievally, if somebody did something horrific, they could expiate the whole thing by making a pilgrimage to Rome, or I suppose possibly other holy sites, but a long and dangerous journey. And when they came back, whatever they'd done was never mentioned again. And anybody who mentioned it or raised it was ostracized. They'd made their journey of expiation, they were forgiven, and it was never mentioned again. So I should think you couldn't offer a greater gift of friendship than to go with somebody on their journey of expiation. And a young Vespasia goes with this young woman on the journey of expiation.
And how wonderful to see Aunt Vespasia as young, because we met her when she was old, and while everybody else got old, she never did age. Although, I'm kind of sorry she didn't survive for the Daniel books. I mean, I know that you said it was so.
About 20, it'd be a bit much. Well, 100 and something.
I don't know. Now, I have to tell you that I read the other day, and I don't remember was the Times or the Journal or something, because I read 3 or 4 papers every morning, that Japan currently numbers 86,700 and some centenarians.
We may have to find out what they do that we don't, or what they don't that we do.
Well, it's diet. A lot of it, I think, is diet and a lot of exercise. They tend to walk and do other stuff. But my point is that it's not that unreasonable for Aunt Vespasia to be over 100, So I think you killed her prematurely.
Well, perhaps I did. I made her old enough to remember Trafalgar and sort of things like that. And then I thought, no, I should have shunt her age around and take it back quite a lot now and again. And I haven't had many complaints that I can't count. I thought, I know I can't, I don't want to. I must do that with myself one of these days if I can manage. I
I
knew
thought
her.
she was a wonderful character, and it's really nice to, in a couple of the Christmas novellas, it's really nice to spend time with her. And I'm glad you gave her a happy marriage towards the end of her life, because she'd been a widow for so long.
Yes, well, I don't think it was more a marriage of convenience. It wasn't unhappy, but I don't think it was anything special.
Well,
But
anyway,
she was fun. And of course, I can always go back and do another Christmas novella in the past with her. I can
exactly.
say anytime I want.
Yep. No, I think it's great that you can do that. I'm really happy that Charlotte and Thomas are, he's retired, Thomas, now from Special Branch and all, but with Daniel, we get to visit his parents from time to time, which is really a pleasure to stay in touch with him.
Yes, I don't think Pitts. I think he's got to the top of the tree. I don't think he's retired yet. He's not working with the police. He's with Special Branch.
I thought he retired. Really? Well, you would know better than I.
Well, he's not old enough to retire yet. Besides, we might take him into the war and the head of Special Branch. You never know.
Oh. So you might write another book about Thomas and Charlotte?
Well, I might. No, I won't do that. I might do one about Daniel and, or even a Christmas novella. Who knows? That's one thing about the Christmas novellas. They can be past, present, future, anything.
Very true. And actually, you're right. I mean, in Daniel, his parents could play a much more major role in one of the stories than they often do.
Yes. Yeah.
Which would be great. So is there a Daniel coming in the spring of 2022?
Yes. Yes, there is. It's handed in and I can't remember what it's called, but
Oh, neither one of us is good on
they
titles, but
change the names very often anyway, so I don't take it very terribly seriously. But it's in February. It's raining all the time, but then in London it frequently rains most of February.
I always love talking to Anne because she's able to say that she has turned in so many books for the future. I think it's really cheering for readers to know that all these treats are still in store. How wonderful. Patrick, why don't you come join us and tell us if we have any questions from the audience, or is there anything you want to talk about?
Well, apparently, according to what I'm seeing, the title is Three Debts Paid. And
That's right. I remember
now. Yeah, you're amazingly prolific. And I know there are probably some writers in our audience here. How do you get the work done? It's incredible how much you're able to accomplish. Do you have a set schedule or a number of words, or how do you do it?
Well, my contract says there must be roughly 100,000 words on the full-length stories and 40,000 on a novella. I planned before. Actually, it's rather interesting. For the first time, my contract, which is a 2-year one, specifies that the first thing I must do is turn in a 10 to 15 page single-spaced outline of the story, and I don't get my down payment until I do. And that's quite a lot of work to 10 or 15 pages single-spaced. And you really, that means that when you get to write, you really know exactly what each scene is going to be and what purpose it serves and where it is and when. And it's you can't say I've got writer's block because you just pointed that that's where you're up to, that's what happens next, now get on with it. But it does help. But it's part of the contract. I mean, I don't get paid if I don't do it.
What does a typical writing day for you look like?
Oh, get up and do the necessary jobs, excuse me. And then usually by 10 o'clock, I've done all the answering and so forth, and then get on with whatever stage of writing I'm at. The first thing I do, apart from the outline, is to write the whole story longhand, because I can only think with a pen in my hand. Then when that's completely done, and I'm usually fairly close to the mark on the number of words, I know what it looks like now, then I dictate it to the typing. But the computer takes dictation. I don't know what language it thinks it's speaking. It's a real wonder to work out what they're saying. But if there's a homonym for anything, they'll come up with that. But you know what you meant roughly. And then I go through that, correcting it, and get a second draft. and then start reworking and seeing what's wrong and what works and what doesn't, and where I've contradicted myself. And I
Are you
probably
one of
did.
those? Are you one of those writers who requires absolute silence, or do you
No.
are you able to have
No.
music in the background, or?
I can have music and sometimes I have television, because this is a soundproof, pretty well, perfectly apartment. And if I don't have the television, I think I'm the only person alive. I mean, if somebody calls me on the telephone that isn't a nuisance call, that's nice. But I just, if it's murmuring in the background, it reminds me that, you know, there is somebody out there. But I usually work through the day, but 4:30 or 5, I'm getting a little bit tired. Oh, and I have mail to answer, which that comes first thing in the morning, because it might be something that alters the day. It usually isn't, but it might be. And I speak to my London agent once a week, and I speak to my American agent once a week on the phone. And that's very encouraging.
I'm sure. Yeah. Are you eventually going to do? It's funny. Whenever Anne comes, or we always get into these great philosophical discussions, and one of the things I always like to pick your brain about, Anne, is the Blitz, the London Blitz, and are you ever going to write about it, or you haven't to date, right? In any of your, you wouldn't.
Well, I haven't got that far in history,
right?
And I don't think my publisher really wants me to do that. I can remember it quite well, but it's not horrific to me because my parents, they must have been aware of what was going on, but they didn't show fear. And when you're a little child, if your parents aren't afraid, you aren't afraid. And we pick up, especially pre-verbal children, pick up a mood very much. But my parents must have kept a wonderful lid on it, because, you know, it wasn't 1 or 2 buildings bombed once. It was the whole city bombed. It was 40-something nights in a row. And every night we got up, and when it was cold, you know, you don't want to be got out of a warm bed and taken down to a shelter. We had a shelter of our own, as lots of people did, a small one, dug in the back garden, but it was always sort of damp and cold and horrible. And then when the all clear went, but I mean, how unfrightened I was. I remember one particular night, I was standing out in the garden looking up at all the pretty lights, tracer bullets, fighter planes directly over the garden. And I said, come on. But I wasn't frightened. I was just, you know, looking at the pretty lights.
I think it was reading Graham Greene, you know, who wrote extensively about that period. He talks about, you know, the beauty of seeing the flares dropping down that would illuminate the streets.
Yes.
And they were beautiful, but ominous, because you knew what the intention was.
They were showing him the pilots where to bomb.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I was, 10 months old when the war started. I don't really remember anything else. So for me, this was just what life was. And when you think how many cities there are in the Middle East and farther that we in the West have bombed into obliteration.
Yeah.
We've no business to get picky about occasionally being on the other end of it.
Right.
I remember walking to school past a big pit where there was a barrage balloon. And it was obviously, I suppose they were dangerous to pilots flying over, which is what the purpose would be.
Is it true, Anne, that you know, there were big piles of debris and, you know, rubble well into the 60s in London? How long did it take for them to really clear it all up?
It took a long time to get it all fixed. I mean, you don't rebuild a city the size of London overnight. At the time I was born, I believe it was the biggest city in the world. And it was very, very thoroughly bombed. The closest it came to my actual house was another house in the same street. I know my mother told me she was walking with me in the pram. I'd be, you know, a year old or whatever. And she stopped and spoke to this other woman, had a baby about the same age. And we had a raid that night. and the woman's house was just a hole in the ground next day.
Wow.
No survivors.
One of our viewers, Marcy, says, she says, my mother was a World War II war bride from North Wales, Great Britain. She was going to nursing school in London during the Blitz. Wow. She probably has some stories to tell.
Oh, yes. Almost everybody would be. But the advantage for a child my age was that I never knew anything else. I mean, if I was about 10 months old when it started, that means I don't really have a memory of any other way of living.
Right.
You always know that there's no butter, there's no sugar. But the first time I saw an egg after the war, it was disgusting, slimy. I'd never seen anything but powdered egg.
Did they have blackouts, Barbara, in Chicago during the war?
Well, I was born, almost a year before Pearl Harbor, so I don't have much memory of the war. I don't remember blackouts. I remember a victory garden. I remember, walking because there wasn't, gas was rationed very severely, and they weren't building automobiles, they were building tanks and so forth.
Right.
But, the thing I can remember most clearly were the ration or the food coupons, because you couldn't just go to the store, you had coupons.
Exactly.
Not as severe as the problem in England. And I can remember opening a drawer in my mother's desk and playing with coupons, thinking, it was I was probably like 3, thinking it was some sort of, card game or something. And my mother was really upset, because I'm shredding the food, whatever it all is. But, I don't recall. I remember the Cold War far more distinctly. I remember the practice, we had in schools where they did things like, have us go under our desk, like a bit like the shelters that you're talking about. It wouldn't have done any good in an atomic blast, for us to be under our desk in a school. But there were a lot of strategies during the Cold War and that was really frightening, because the menace was so inchoate. It wasn't as direct as knowing, that the Germans were coming in a bomb, because, we were all sitting here thinking the Russians were going to set off, some kind of atomic,
war.
right. And so it was, you couldn't really get a grasp of it. So it was very scary.
Well,
Yeah.
the things like hiding under your desk may not have served a purpose that would have saved you if you were bombed. But I think organization and feeling somebody's in charge serves a very good emotional purpose.
Well, I think that's true. It gives you, at least you have some sort of strategy. Now that I'm old, I know if there ever really is an atomic raid that comes, I want to be at ground central, because I don't want to survive into some brave new atomic world.
But I'm probably not going to survive all that much longer, maybe 10, 15 years, but that will be it.
Keep thinking about these Japanese centenarians, Anne. We have years
Yes,
to go.
okay, 20 years.
That's right. Both
Yes.
of us. We've got, Anne and I are almost the same age. So, I figured 20 years, we're good for it.
You'll both outlive me
Yes.
handily, I'm sure.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if we can stay productive as well as, just.
Well, there'll always be another story, won't there? Always. Think how many millions of stories have been written already, and yet we're still managing more. There's no end to it, because there's as many stories as there must be people.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, absolutely true. Are there any other questions, Patrick?
Yeah, the inevitable question. What about William Monk? Any chance of him reappearing, or is he on hiatus?
Oh, I think I've done all the Monk stories. He comes into the one that I've just finished, like this morning.
Oh, really?
Well, it's Scuff, his adopted little urchin, and Crow, and it's a little bit later in their lives. Scuff's 22, but Monk's still head of the River Police, and he makes a short appearance.
Well, thank goodness for the Christmas novellas, where we have an opportunity to see Monk and his entourage once again.
Yes, but I can only do what my publisher tells me they will buy, but I can only do so many and do them to the best of my ability. I'm sort of kind of rushed. I'm working 6 days a week now. And I can't do justice to any more that I'm doing. And if I stop doing Elena's and Daniel's, they might realize they can live without them. And I don't want them to think that. I want them to think that, yes, I've got to have some.
Now, anything
Well-
going on? I know you're always working on TV projects too, or at least you were. Anything going on there, TV or Hollywood?
We're in a bit of a hiatus at the moment, but things are going on, but I can't say exactly what, because it's such a on-off process. And if I tell you something, I might learn news that'll make it untrue tomorrow. And I don't ask to be told. I ask specifically not to be told, because I can't stand the emotional tension.
It's got to be crazy making after a while.
It is. That's what's wrong with me.
Well, let's hope that long form television, which has obviously benefited enormously from the pandemic, where people have watched more and more television, will, Jackie Winspear's whole Maisie Dobbs series has been adopted recently. And the problem with historicals is they're expensive, compared to modern things. Jackie Winspear, her Maisie Dobbs books, was recently announced. There's 16 of them, I think, or 17, something like that. But they're on the way to becoming long form television. And so the difficulty with historicals is the cost, because you have to come up with, it's not just the costumes and all, but you have to come up with the appropriate settings. I'm trying, when I was watching Foyle's War, there's a thing at the end of Foyle's War where you can see what into it. And I was surprised to learn that in the post-war Foyle's War, it was all shot in Dublin because there wasn't enough of London, thanks to the Blitz that we've been talking about, that really looked authentic, to the
It has
times.
to not only be authentic, but actually look it.
Yeah. So there are a lot of obstacles. And, if you're wanting to do a Victorian series or so forth, maybe the Elena Standish would have better luck.
Well, we've got interest and even some money down on both the Pits and the Monks, but you're never there till you're there.
Yeah, it's just, you just never know. I mean, it's all a crapshoot in terms of all of that. And sometimes things get done and sometimes they never do.
And sometimes they're done and you wish they hadn't been, because it's not the way you saw it, or they can alter it so much that it loses its essential character. And I'd rather be with the right people if it takes longer than with somebody who's going to do it.
Absolutely. The one thing you don't want is a bad series done. So better none than really bad. Yeah. Well, it has really been a pleasure to talk to you, as it always is. I'm going to remind everybody that we'll probably pick them up from Anne tomorrow. So early next week, we should have our copies of A Darker Reality available for you. And in November, we will have A Christmas Legacy. Thank you, Patrick. Which Anne will sign, which I think is like a perfect Christmas gift. So
yes, and whilst I've got you, have you sent me the labels to put onto these?
Bill will do it all tomorrow. He can arrange for UPS to come with labels and pick up the books all at the same time.
Yes,
so,
if he tells me, so that I'm sure that I'm right there and ready. And
he'll email you in the morning and we'll get it all done. I know it's not always convenient to print out things and all, so we can take care of it that way. Was there anything else, Patrick, that we're overlooking?
I don't think so.
Wonderful. Well, in that case, good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's always a pleasure. Maybe by Daniel Pitt, you'll be able to come back and see us, because I really miss having you here on our dinners.
Yes, I miss being. It's the only place I still want to go to visit.
Well, thank you. We'll see how it goes, but it would be our pleasure to bring you over in February or whenever month it is.
Yes, I believe that flying at the moment is a very hazardous.
Well, it's unpleasant. I don't know if it's hazardous, but definitely unpleasant.
I've heard some various stories about passengers.
Yes, lots of adults having tantrums that would put a 2-year-old to shame. So right at the moment, probably not ideal. We'll talk. Anyway, we hope to see Anne in person at the Poison Pen before too much longer. But thank goodness for Zoom, where we at least have a chance to connect. So thank you all very much. Good night, everybody.